Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a literal explosion in modern medicine. We're talking about a paradigm shift that could fundamentally change how you age, how you heal, and how you manage your weight. On one side of the ring, we have these multi-billion-dollar clinical breakthroughs in weight loss from mainstream pharmaceutical giants. And on the other side, a rapidly expanding, heavily scrutinized underground of regenerative biohacking and compounding peptides. We're looking at two completely different worlds, both aiming to fundamentally alter human biology, metabolism, and recovery. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the weight loss giants, figure out how triple agonists actually work, and dig into side effects and microdosing. Then we'll pivot to the healing peptide underground and finish up with the huge FDA compounding crackdown. Section 1. The weight loss giants. Let's kick things off by looking at the sheer clinical data coming straight out of the commercial GLP-1 space. I want to pose a question to you right out of the gate. What happens when a weight loss drug hits a 28.7% reduction in body weight? Because, up until recently, that number was completely unheard of unless you were talking about invasive bariatric surgery. But these new clinical trials have entirely moved the goalposts on what is pharmacologically possible. The escalation in weight loss power here is just staggering. Based on the latest data from the New England Journal of Medicine and Eli Lilly, just look at this progression. We started with semaglutide, which brought us a really impressive 13.7% weight loss, right? Then tirzepatide came along and pushed the envelope to 20.2%. But then, the latest phase 3 trials for Eli Lilly's Retatrutide showed an average of 28.7% weight loss at 68 weeks for patients on the highest dose. Guys, that's an average of over 71 pounds per patient. To put that in perspective, that's literally like losing the weight of a fully grown golden retriever. Section 2. How triple agonists work. Now, to understand how we made that massive leap from 13.7% to nearly 30%, we really have to look under the hood. The secret sauce behind Retatrutide's record-breaking numbers is its mechanism. It is a triple agonist. So while older drugs like semaglutide target just one receptor, GLP-1, and tirzepatide targets two, retatrutide is the single molecule that activates three distinct receptors. We're talking GIP, GLP-1, and glucagon. By hitting all three of these at the exact same time, it just blows right past the limitations of the older drugs, exponentially amplifying your metabolic and fat-burning effects. But the weight loss is really only half the story here. The TRIUMPH-4 late-stage trials revealed these massive secondary benefits. Patients actually experienced an average 75.8% reduction in knee osteoarthritis pain. And get this, over 14% of patients became completely free of knee pain. Imagine what that means for a person's everyday quality of life. Add to that a 14-point drop in systolic blood pressure and major reductions in cholesterol. We aren't just talking about aesthetic weight loss anymore. This is profound systemic metabolic healing. Section 3. Side effects and microdosing. So the absolutely crucial point here is that these massive clinical victories do not come without hidden costs. And because of that, patients are having to get pretty creative. As Dr. Craig Conover points out, the standard shotgun dosages of these drugs can seriously overwhelm the body. Patients are dropping weight incredibly fast, sometimes 15 pounds in just 3 weeks. But that leads to a rapid loss of lean muscle mass, that dreaded Ozempic face where all your facial fat is just depleted, and some pretty severe gastrointestinal distress. But wait, here is the absolute most glaring hidden cost. What happens after you actually stop taking Retatrutide? The weight regain problem is severe. Just like we've seen in the discontinuation data for semaglutide and tirzepatide, every single GLP-1 drug faces this exact same challenge. Once the drug is removed, that suppressed appetite just vanishes, and the weight comes back with an incredibly rapid velocity. So it basically becomes a lifelong commitment, or you're pretty much guaranteed a massive rebound. Furthermore, with retatrutide's incredible power comes a totally new, kind of unique side effect. In the late-stage trials, 20.9% of patients on the highest 12 milligram dose experienced something called dysesthesia. Basically, this is an abnormal, sometimes painful sense of touch where normal skin sensations suddenly feel really unusual or overly sensitive. Now, while it rarely led to people dropping out of the trial, it's definitely a safety signal that analysts are watching very, very closely. To combat these side effects and, of course, that rapid weight regain problem we just talked about, a new clinical trend is taking off. Microdosing. Instead of just hammering the body with a standard pharmaceutical dosage, clinicians are using compounded versions of these drugs to start incredibly low. Then they titrate up very, very slowly. By keeping the weight loss to under 2 pounds a week, patients can preserve their vital muscle mass, completely bypass that intense nausea, and really set themselves up for sustainable long-term success rather than that brutal crash and rebound. Section 4. The Healing Peptide Underground. Okay, let's switch gears and move to the other side of the peptide world to see how certain subcultures are using compounded regenerative compounds to optimize the body even further. While mainstream pharma is hyper-focused on GLP-1s, longevity and sports clinics have been quietly focusing on growth hormone-releasing peptides, or secretagogues. And these secretagogues come in a few different flavors, depending on what your specific goals are. Ipamorelin, for example, is famous for being super clean. It promotes deep sleep and gentle fat loss without spiking your stress hormones. Then you have tesamorelin, which is actually an FDA-approved drug specifically designed to reduce dangerous visceral fat right around your organs. Meanwhile, MK677 is an oral option, but it stimulates a massive appetite and can elevate cortisol and prolactin, which, makes it a bit less ideal for a lot of folks. And all of this points to exactly where the science is heading right now: stacking. Instead of just taking one single compound, doctors are combining multiple peptides at much lower doses. Imagine, for example, injecting a combination of BPC-157 for tissue repair, ipamorelin for subcutaneous fat loss, and tesamorelin for visceral fat loss, all right before bed. Because they have to be taken on an empty stomach to actually work, this pre-sleep timing perfectly augments your body's natural nighttime growth hormone pulse. In fact, many clinicians are using these exact stacks to directly offset the muscle-wasting effects of those GLP-1 weight loss drugs we were looking at earlier. Section 5. The FDA Compounding Crackdown. We now pivot to the regulatory hammer that has completely reshaped how people access these optimization compounds. To really understand this landscape, you've got to know the difference between Category 1 and Category 2 peptides. Category 1 basically means the peptide is completely legal for highly regulated compounding pharmacies to produce, with super strict purity standards, as long as it's prescribed by a doctor. Category 2, on the other hand, means the FDA has heavily restricted it. Over 2023 and 2024, the FDA actually moved beloved recovery peptides like BPC-157 and TB-500 into Category 2. This effectively banned compounding pharmacies from making them, and unfortunately, that drove a ton of consumers straight into the arms of entirely unregulated, sketchy research chemical websites. But here is where the story takes a major turn. A 2023 FDA analysis found that over 40% of the products sold by those underground research vendors contained inaccurate dosing, degradation, or just outright contamination. It was a mess. Realizing the massive safety crisis this created, the highly anticipated April 2026 FDA update actually reverses course. It moves 14 key peptides, including the heavy hitters like BPC-157 and TB-500, right back into Category 1. This essentially restores the legal pharmaceutical-grade production pipeline to keep patients safe. So how exactly are you supposed to navigate this new landscape? Well, Fit Science provides a really clear framework for legally acquiring these reclassified Category 1 peptides. Step 1, you have to establish a relationship with a prescribing physician, usually at a dedicated longevity or TRT clinic. Step 2, get comprehensive baseline blood work to check your metabolic markers and IGF-1 levels. Then, your doctor will write you a specific prescription which gets filled by a highly regulated 503A or 503B compounding pharmacy. Finally, you absolutely must do follow-up blood work in 4 to 8 weeks. Remember, this is clinical medicine we're talking about, not a free-for-all, and these steps are exactly how you protect your health. Let's quickly look at the common pitfalls patients run into here. The single biggest mistake: assuming that a move back to Category 1 means the peptide is suddenly FDA approved. Let me be clear, it is not. They remain off-label therapeutics. Category 1 just means they are legal to compound. Another huge mistake is continuing to buy from those underground research vendors just to save a few bucks. Doing that costs you all your legal protection and purity verification. And finally, self-prescribing without getting blood work done, that means you're flying completely blind regarding your organ health and hormonal shifts. Never a good idea. Which brings us to our final thought. We are literally living through a golden age of metabolic science right now. On one hand, we have Retatrutide achieving nearly 30% weight loss in a single blockbuster pen. On the other hand, we have physicians meticulously stacking microdose GLP-1s with Category 1 recovery peptides like BPC-157 to perfectly customize human optimization while preserving that all-important muscle. So we'll leave you with this. Does the future of human health belong to mass-produced pharmaceutical blockbusters or highly personalized, doctor-monitored compounding stacks? It's a fascinating question and one that is definitely going to define the next decade of medicine. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the science.